The plaza went silent the moment the visitor pointed over the rope line. "Move him," the visitor said, his voice cool and sharp. It was a foreign VIP, a powerful man with a long coat, dark glasses, and an entourage of cameras and guards. Pointed right at the tomb guard, like he was pointing at a piece of furniture that needed to be moved out of his way. The tomb of the unknown. Soldier glowed white in the afternoon sun. The sentinel paced his line, 21 steps. Turn, pause. 21 seconds. His polished heel tapped the mat like a metronome. Did not look up. He did not react. The rifle rested on his shoulder like a promise. "Move him," the visitor repeated. One of his security men lifted the rope and set a shoe on the stone. The crowd froze. You could hear a cough echo from way in the back. A child's whisper died in a mother's hand. Phone screens rose like a tide, all pointing toward the single figure in the sand-gray coat and gleaming hatband. Veterans in baseball caps stood. Taller. A woman in a red dress held her breath, her hand over her heart. "Where are you watching from? If you believe honor and sacrifice still matter, let us know in the comments." The sentinel reached the end of his line and turned. The metal tip of his bayonet caught the light. He paused exactly 21 seconds, staring straight ahead, eyes level with the horizon. The visitor's cameras clicked and clicked and clicked. The entourage murmured in a language most of the crowd didn't know. The visitor raised 2 fingers like he was giving orders at a dinner table. "Make him move," said to his guard. A uniformed park officer near the edge of the plaza shifted his weight. He touched his radio. A retired colonel in the crowd clenched his jaw and took a step closer to the rope. In the colonel's coat pocket rested a small velvet box with a bronze star inside. He had brought it today for a reason. The sentinel took his first step back down the line. 1, 2, 3. Glassy shoes. Even stride. Every motion measured like time itself kept watch with him. "Excuse me, sir," the park officer said, holding out a hand to the visitor's man. "You cannot cross the guard in the dark suit brushed past him with a hard shoulder and one more step toward the mat." The sentinel did not flinch. He did not glance. He was more than a man. He was an oath in motion. A breeze carried a faint smell of cut grass. Somewhere a bell tolled from the amphitheater behind the trees. The sun slid across his brass. Sweat beaded on the foreign visitor's forehead, even in the shade. He stood like a king at a balcony, expecting the world to shift for him. It did not. The sentinel reached the far end of the mat. He'll click, turn, pause. The crowd's attention pulled tight, like a rope about to snap. Every phone stared, every heart counted. Every veteran tried to decide if they should act or wait. The visitor lifted a lazy hand, and his man reached forward. Palm open, fingers stretching toward the rifle on the sentinel's shoulder. "Stop," a voice whispered from somewhere near the rope. It wasn't loud. It was just honest. It was the kind of word that doesn't ask. It claims. The hand kept going. The sentinel's chin stayed level. The rifle didn't budge. Not yet. Not until the count ended. Not until the oath demanded. He had trained for storms. He had trained for drunks. He had trained for loud tourists, sudden thunder and lightning that split the air. But this was different. This was a test in front of the unknowns, where the past looks back at you and decides. "Who you are, move him," the visitor said, for the 3rd time. And the finger of his man brushed the guard's sleeve, and then everything changed. If you're with us right now, hold your breath. Do not blink. Because what happened next shook the entire plaza. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes. He was 29. He grew up in a small town with a river that ran brown in the spring. His mother taught 2nd grade. His father drove a delivery truck at night and fixed neighbors' lawnmowers on Saturdays. Daniel learned early that the most important jobs are often quiet. He learned that real strength doesn't brag. He joined the army at 19. He went where he was sent. He learned to carry weight without complaint. He learned that sand finds every seam in a soldier's life. He learned to keep his hands clean and his heart steady. But war still got in a hot valley far from home. He lost his best friend, Specialist Micah Lee. They were on patrol. A dirt path, a goat pen, a small arch of earth, a flash, a sound that ripped time apart. After, there was nothing but dust and ringing. Then the shouting began. Micah didn't get to come back. He didn't get to finish the jokes he started. He didn't get to see his little brother graduate. He didn't get to grow old. Daniel came home with a bronze star he didn't feel like he had earned. He kept it in a box beside a folded flag. Sometimes he opened the box and stared at the dull gold star that seemed to shine even in the dark. It felt heavy for its size. It felt like a word he couldn't say out loud. He didn't want to be thanked. He wanted to do something that honored friends who did not get to come home. He wanted a duty that wasn't about him. He requested that Old Gartha, 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, they guard the nation's capital. They perform funerals at Arlington, stand in storms and in sun without a quiver. He had seen the tomb guards as a child. He remembered thinking they were statues. Now he knew better. The training for tomb guards is long and exact. It is weeks of being corrected and then corrected again. Shine to a mirror, fit to a blade, steps measured, words perfect. Recruits learn history and names, dates, and battles. The stories of the unknowns and the reason why they never break. Daniel failed some days and passed others. He went back when he failed. He learned the names carved in white. He learned the long path from the living to the marble and back. He had nightmares sometimes. He got up anyway. He ironed and polished and practiced in his head until even his dreams walked 21 steps and paused 21 seconds. 21 matters. It is the number of the highest honor, like the 21-gun salute at a funeral for a president or a general. It is respect made into a number you can count. It is a rhythm you can live by when the world spins too fast. The steps are always the same. 21 across the mat. Turn to face east for 21 seconds. Turn to face north for 21 seconds. Then start again. Repeat for an hour. Repeat for a shift. Repeat in sun, wind, lightning, and snow. No matter who comes to watch or who does not. Why did he seek this? Because here, the act of standing is a promise. Here, he could make his silence useful. He could give back a tiny drop to the ocean he owed. When he pinned the Tomb Guard identification badge to his uniform for the first time, he felt the weight of it settle into his chest. There are not many people who ever earn it. It is not like other badges. You do not just keep it because you did the training once. You keep it because your life stays correct. You keep it because your standard remains perfection, even when no one is watching. People asked him if it was hard to stand so still. He said the truth. Standing still is not hard. Being worthy of the ones you stand for, that is hard. On rain days, water ran down his collar into the small of his back. He did not twitch. On hot days, heat pressed like a hand on his helmet. He did not wipe his brow. At night, when no one was there, when the cemetery lay under a black sky and the deer moved like ghosts among the stones, he still paced and turned and counted. The unknowns did not have names on their graves. It did not make them less. On his days off, he visited Section 60 and left a coin on a friend's marker. It was a quiet code between veterans. A penny means you visited. Nickel means you trained. Together, a dime means you served together. Quarter means you were there when he fell. Daniel didn't talk about what he left where. He just stood there and thought of Mika's laugh and the sound of the river back home in the way. A bronze star can feel like a stone in your pocket. He did not wear that medal. He did not show it to people. It was not a thing to show. It was a promise he felt he still had to keep. That morning when he checked his shoes and straightened his belt and breathed steady before stepping onto the plaza, he repeated a simple line in his head. For them, it's not for me. He stepped out onto the mat. He counted. The world narrowed to black rubber, white stone, and the long, straight gaze beyond the crowds. He knew the rules. He knew the rope line. He knew how to handle loud tourists kindly, without breaking the moment. He knew what it meant to stop and speak, and what it cost. He knew he might have to do that today. That was fine. He had a voice. He also had restraint. The plaza filled up. Cameras, kids, whispering teachers. Oh. Even a band of motorcyclists in black vests, their patches bright in the light. And then, sometime after the noon change, the foreign VIP arrived with his crew, his men, his attitude, and his order. Daniel kept pacing, counted his steps. He waited for the oath to tell him what to do next. They said a special guest was touring that afternoon. Usually special guests behave because the space itself corrects people. Marble, the names, the hush. These things demand respect from anyone with a normal heart. But some people think rules are for others. He arrived with a convoy of black SUVs and a flash of chrome. Security fanned out like a stage show. Cameras swung, a drone hummed and was quickly told to land by a ranger. The visitor wore a coat too heavy for the weather and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. It was a wealthy leader from far away. He was used to doors opening and people moving aside. He liked the sound of his own voice. He liked to be seen. He stepped up to the rope like it was a ribbon he might cut at an opening. He glanced at the tomb, but only for a beat. His gaze slid to the sentinel with more interest. It was the gaze of someone staring at a puzzle he thinks he can solve by force. "What is he?" he said in English to his translator. "A statue? A show?" "He is a tomb guard, sir," the translator whispered. "Please, this is sacred." Ground. The visitor's camera crew went to work. Lenses clicked open like eyes. A man in a hoodie held up a big phone and started a live stream with a red bar across the top. The captions rolled. "Live at Arlington, watch this." The chat scrolled fast in a language most of the crowd didn't know. A tour guide drew a breath, ready to explain. A park officer, calm and polite, stepped close and said, "Sir, please remain behind the rope. Please keep your voice low." The visitor's mouth twisted. "I want to stand there," he said, pointing straight at the black mat where the sentinel walked. "Better view," the officer repeated. "Please remain behind the rope. Silence and respect are required here." The visitor tilted his head toward his security man. The man was thick-necked, with a wire behind his ear. He lifted the rope and set his shoe on the stone. The rope stuttered on the stanchion with a small metallic squeak. It was such a small sound. But here small sounds are big, the crowd reacted. Like a flock when a hawk sweeps low. Heads jerked, hands rose. A veteran muttered, "No." A group of high school kids went quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause on their branch. The visitor tested the silence. He hummed a few notes, and then spoke even louder. "Move him," he said, like he was ordering a chair to be pulled back from a table. "He is in my shot." The translator tugged at the visitor's sleeve. "Sir, please, this is not." The visitor brushed him off like lint. He took a step. Closer to the rope, his camera crew swung left for a better angle, one of them flattening his hand against the stanchion to steady himself. The handprint shone against the steel pole. Whole mood shifted, from quiet to tight. From watching to warning, a woman in a park ranger hat called for backup on her radio. The words were even calm, but her eyes flicked to the sentinels. Boots and back to the rope line, as if she had measured that distance 1,000 times. A retired colonel, white hair and a back still straight, put his fingers on the velvet box in his pocket. The one with the bronze star. He had carried it since morning. He had told himself he would know when to take it out. He did not know yet. He waited. The visitor smiled again, raised his hand and pointed with 2 fingers toward the sentinel. "Move him," he said, lowering his voice now, like a reel. "King." Now, the crowd heard it. The cameras heard it. And the sentinel heard it. Too, because he hears everything even when he does not show it. But he kept walking. The visitor wasn't satisfied. Men like him never are, not when they believe the world is soft. He took another step. The rope bowed. The guard in the suit slid a toe past the line. It made a whisper of sound across the stone. The sentinel reached the end of his path and turned. Heel clicked. The sharp sound sliced the air like a blade. Face north, breathed in and out once. The sunlight flashed across his belt buckle and the bayonet on the M14 rifle that rested on his shoulder. The visitor smirked, as if he had found the seam in a wall. He lifted his hand, and his camera operator, the one in the hoodie, started. To move, the operator pushed past a family, knocking a paper program from a child's hand. The paper flitted onto the stone and lay there like a dropped leaf. Hey, the child's mother whispered, reaching for the paper. Her eyes stayed on the man crossing the rope. The operator set one foot onto the mat. It was the line not to cross. The black mat is not a rug. It is the path of a duty older than the man who stood upon it. It is not a place for open shoes and casual steps. It is not a place for a selfie stick. It is not a place for anyone except the sentinel for that hour and the relief who will replace him. A breath sucked in from 100 mouths at once. The sentinel held. He had learned to let the clock tell him what to do. The 21 seconds were almost finished. He did not cut them short. He did not change them for anyone. He did not drop his eyes to the camera operator's sneaker. He did not let anger push him into action before duty did. That was the part people never see. The part where a soldier chooses patience even when he has every right to act. The visitor took that patience for weakness. They often do. He smiled wider and nodded at his bodyguard. The bodyguard reached forward again, not stepping onto the mat but leaning over it, stretching. His fingertips brushed the wool at the sentinel's sleeve. A dozen veterans in the crowd flinched. One reached for his own shoulder, perhaps remembering a rifle he once held. The retired colonel's hand closed around the box in his pocket, so tight the velvet edges bit into his palm. Park officers tensed, stepping closer. One of them lifted a hand to signal stop, but she didn't shout. She waited, eyes on the sentinel. This was his post. If he caved, everything caved. If he stood, everything stood. The camera's dozens now caught the scene from every angle. There were tourists. There were locals. There were kids from a school on a trip. There were bikers and nurses and a guy in a suit who had stepped out during lunch. Their mouths were tight lines. Their eyes were hard. More than one person whispered, "Please stop. Please." The sentinel counted down the last 3 seconds in his head. 3.2.1. His mind was quiet. His pulse beat strong, not fast. He had been in worse places. He had heard worse words. He had seen what real danger looked like. This was just disrespect in a nice coat. The bodyguard extended his hand again, now not just brushing the sleeve, but reaching toward the wood and steel of the rifle. The operator on the mat leaned in for a close shot, the camera lens almost catching the light on the sentinel's polished brass. A veteran in the back shook his head and murmured, "Will he move?" He didn't mean the operator. He meant the sentinel. Everything hung between one breath and the next. Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes moved. It was not wild. It was not angry. It was exact. It was the movement of a man who had practiced the same motion 1,000 times in an empty drill hall with a sergeant correcting. His elbow by the width of a coin. His heel struck the mat with a crack that bounced off the marble and rang back from the amphitheater steps. He brought the rifle from his shoulder to the front with a smooth, trained swing. The bayonet stayed high and safe, no threat, only order. He stepped off the mat to the marble at the rope line, angled slightly toward the bodyguard and the operator, his eyes forward. He's not looking into theirs, but staring through them the way a lighthouse looks through fog. He stood there with all the stillness of the mountains you see out of a plane window, and then he gave his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clear and sharp, the syllables biting each word in two. "It is requested that you remain behind the rail and maintain an atmosphere of silence and respect at all times." The words were not loud like a shout. They were loud like a command. They were made to carry across parade fields and quiet rooms both. Pigeons lifted from the railing. A boy's hat fell off his head and he didn't even bend to pick it up. The voice hit the bodyguard like a wall. He stopped with his fingertips an inch from the rifle and froze, as if someone had pressed pause on a screen. The operator on the mat flinched and jumped back off the black rubber, his sneaker squeaking on the marble. "Now," Daniel said, the second word lower, the tone one shade deeper, the way a drum sounds when you put your hand on it. "Not for me, for them." The last 2 words cut even deeper. For them, a simple phrase, and the entire plaza heard what he meant. For the unknown ones, for the fallen, the names you do not know, and the lives you live because of them. The visitor's face shifted. His chin pulled back a fraction. The false smile faded. It was the look of a man who's used to open doors and found one that will not move no matter how hard he pushes. His camera crew turned their lenses from the tomb, guard to the visitor, and the new angle told the whole story. The guard's calm eyes, the bodyguard's half-raised hand, the bright white tomb behind them, the rope, the mat, the marble, the badge. In every phone screen, the caption changed. It wasn't "watch a man move a guard," it was "watch a guard. Protect sacred ground." The retired colonel stepped to the rope. He didn't say a word. He reached into his pocket and took out the velvet box. He opened it with fingers that had shaken on darker days, but were steady now. He lifted the bronze star. It caught the sun with a dull, honest glow. And then, with the kind of care a man has when he does something that matters, he let it fall. To the stone at his feet, the metal made a small, pure sound. Not a clatter, not a crash, just a ring like a bell far away. They saw the star lying there and the old man with tears in his eyes, but his head held high. "Earned. By men better than me," he whispered. For them, the plaza breathed again, all at once. The bodyguard pulled his hand back as if the rifle were hot, took a step away from the rope. The operator reset his camera on his chest and looked at his shoes. The visitor cleared his throat and tried to grow his smile again, but it did not come back. The translator looked relieved through eyes that had been tense for the last 5 minutes. Phones recorded everything. The angle from the left, the angle from the right. The close shot of the sentinel's badge, the wide shot showing the marble. The trees, the crowd standing straight now, as if the command had fixed not just posture but purpose. The first clip hit the internet before the sentinel resumed his pace. It carried a simple caption, "Respect." Another clip focused on the colonel's hand as he dropped the bronze star. Its caption read, "Gave it back to the ones who never could." In minutes, comments flowed from around the world. People who had never been there felt the weight of the silence. People who had. People who had served. People who had lost. People who had simply needed to see someone stand when standing mattered. Staff Sergeant Reyes stood there for one more breath. He returned the rifle to his shoulder. He stepped back onto the mat. He resumed his 21 steps. The moment had passed. The lesson had not. Security moved in not at a run, not with a show, but with the quiet speed of people who know their job. A pair of Arlington officers guided the bodyguard, and the camera operator back behind the rope and led them along the path toward the exit. A park officer stepped between the visitor and the rope, with a hand out and a respectful nod that still meant no. "Double quotes, sir. Said this way, please." The visitor started to protest. The words died on his tongue. He glanced at the crowd, at the phones, at the faces that were no longer impressed by his coat or his cars. He seemed smaller when the camera lenses looked at him with that new angle, straightened his sleeves and went where he was told. The translator bowed to the park officer as they passed. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with both embarrassment and relief. A handful of the visitor's staff still tried to look important, but their shoulders were lower. The bodyguard kept his eyes down. The operator finally turned off his live stream and tucked the phone in his pocket like a child putting away a toy after a scolding as they left. The plaza's silence returned like a tide. It wasn't empty, it was full. The sound of the sentinels, heel and toe on the mat, filled the space between breaths. The world seemed to slow back into its correct shape. The retired colonel bent to pick up the bronze star. He held it in his palm one last time, tracing the edges with his thumb. He didn't put it back in the box. He didn't tuck it away. He looked around for a place that felt right and saw the wreath stand near the rope, where flowers from a morning ceremony still stood fresh. He stepped up to the limit line, looked at the sentinel, and, receiving the smallest nod that said it is understood, he set the medal at the base of the stand with care. He saluted not quick, not casual, the full measured salute of a man who has not forgotten how. The brim of his cap shaded his eyes, but everyone could see the line of his mouth and the way his chin settled when he dropped his hand. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He didn't need anyone to be. A little boy tugged at his dad's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "he's a hero." "Both of them," his dad said, eyes on the sentinel. "All of them." Around the plaza, veterans brought their hands to their brows. Some saluted. Some stood with hands over hearts. Some simply straightened their backs that last inch, as if their spine remembered something it had been missing. A young woman in a wheelchair wiped her cheeks and smiled without showing teeth. A biker in a leather vest took off his sunglasses and tucked them into his shirt and stared hard at the white stone, till the edges blurred. The sentinel continued his steps. He did not look at the metal. He did not look at the colonel. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the horizon and the path. That was his job. That was the promise he had made. Minutes later, when the relief came out for the next change of the guard, the crisp ceremony washed over the plaza like a wave. The guards exchanged words neither the crowd nor the cameras could hear. Shoes clicked, steel flashed. It was all perfection, like always. The only difference was the way people stood straighter than before. It was quieter than before. Afterward, in the shade by the guard room, the relief commander, a staff sergeant, with a voice like gravel, smoothed by water, stepped up to Reyes. He didn't smile. Tomb guards don't grin on duty, but there was a warmth in his eyes. You handled it, he said low. By the book. Reyes nodded once. For them, he said. The commander's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened another shade. He touched the brim of his hat. Always. The park officer brought the bronze star over to the staff and asked, what should be done? It wasn't trash. It wasn't a lost item. It was a gift. It meant something big. Store it with the wreaths and notes, the commander said gently. We'll make sure it's kept safe. The colonel watched from a few feet away, hands folded, content to let the younger soldiers handle the details. When the commander turned, he stepped up and spoke quietly. I carried that for a long time, he said. But it always felt like it belonged here. Not with me. The commander nodded. We'll take care of it, sir. Reyes gave him a small nod, the kind that passes between people who don't need many words. Reyes returned it with a look that said he understood. Thought of Micah Lee in Section 60 and a coin on a stone. He thought of the long, slow work of guarding something you cannot see. The idea of honor. Back out on the plaza, the crowd thinned as the sun moved, but not all at once. People lingered, taking one last look, one last breath of the clean quiet. A girl held her phone but didn't take a picture. She just stood and let the moment settle in her bones. On the internet, the clips kept climbing millions of views. The comments filled up with flags, prayer hands, and simple words from people in cities and towns with names the sentinel would never hear. Their stories spilled out. My granddad is buried there. I went on a field trip and saw a guard in a lightning storm. My brother never came home. Thank you, respect. For them. That night, TV shows ran the clip. Anchors' spoken voices too loud for the subject. But the video didn't need their words. It spoke for itself. The moment stood on its own. One soldier. One order. One old man's medal making a small. Perfect sound. If you were standing there that day, you would remember the feeling more than the words. You would remember the weight of the air when the sentinel's command rolled across the marble. You would remember the way people carried themselves different afterward. You would remember that the silence at the tomb is not emptiness. It is strength. It is a choice. Their silence isn't weakness. It's strength. Their stillness isn't performance. It's readiness. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember why honor matters. Tell them what you saw. A soldier who stood firm and a veteran who laid down his medal to honor the ones who had no names. Tell them the truth about courage. It does not shout. It stands. When the time comes, it speaks with a clear voice that reminds the rest of us who we are supposed to be.